everyone, I'm Brea and welcome to my channel Tales of Tales, and today we're going to be doing a quarterly wrap up. So if you kind of scroll through my channel a little bit, you'll notice that I don't really do monthly wrap ups, and that's because I can go months without reading anything. Also, I'm a slow reader, so months that I do read things, sometimes it's only like 2, 3, 4 books, and I just don't know if you guys would just want to see a wrap up that only included 3 books. So I just figured I would just do a quarterly one so that we actually have a handful of books to talk about. So we're going to be talking about books that I read for July, August, and September. And I read a total of 14 books in those 3 months. As well as us trying this new format of a quarterly wrap up, I'm also going to be trying out some different filming locations in this video. You know, I want y'all's opinion on which location you like the best, you know, and also I'm someone, when I watch videos, it's really hard for me to like stick around on a video if someone is just like standing in the same spot the entire time. Granted, there are some people whose personalities just shine and just pop out, you know, and I could watch them all day. They could be eating a bowl of ice cream and I would just watch it. You know, some people are like that. Not sure if that's my personality type. So I just also want to try this, 1, for y'all's viewing pleasure, and 2, so that I don't have to sit in the same spot for 35 minutes while I talk. So let's go ahead and jump into a few books that I read for July. So first up for July, I read Bad Fat Black Girl by Cecilia Bowen, and I actually listened to this on audio, and I highly recommend it on audio. It kind of felt like, you know, your friend or your homegirl is just kind of like talking to you about her life experiences, and I think you just get a lot more out of it reading it on audio. And so the title of this book is definitely reflective of the content of this book. This author kind of touches on something that she terms as trap feminism, which is essentially when feminism and like the hip-hop culture intersect, and she touches on how Black women, and especially Black fat women, are, you know, their sexuality a lot of the times is viewed in the media one way, whereas other people's sexuality is viewed in another way. But then it also just touches on like sexism and fat phobia and capitalism from a Black woman's perspective, which I thought was just awesome. And what I liked about this book is that I feel like we got part memoir, so Cecily really goes into some of her experiences as like a sex worker, and just how she navigates some like conversations and some of her experiences. And so she just really touches on a lot of different things that I think are just really relevant. And I will also say it's a very short listen too. It was only about 4.5 hours long, and I absolutely loved it, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. All right, so next up I read 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson. And so I've never read a Peter Swanson book before, so this was my first time kind of going into one of his books. And part of the reason I even decided to pick him up was because a lot of people here on BookTube talk about Peter Swanson and how good of like a mystery thriller author he is. So in 8 Perfect Murders, we follow a bookstore owner who writes an article about the 8 perfect murders that are kind of reflected in literature, but then he kind of gets wrapped up into this police investigation when someone starts actually committing these murders in real life based on the list that he created. You know, this book I would say was pretty fast-paced. I think I enjoyed the like writing style and that it was a quick read. However, I will say it wasn't anything like earth-shattering to me, and I think if you've read a lot of mystery thrillers, then this might not be a book that's going to like blow you out of the water. You know what I mean? I think especially if you've read books that are mentioned in here, then I think your bank of twists and turns that could possibly be at the end of this book, you know, you could probably guess it. Me, on the other hand, I think I've read like a moderate amount of mystery thrillers, and I still didn't really guess the end, and I enjoyed the ride getting there. And I definitely felt during the book, I was like, I can't really trust anybody. I don't know who to believe, which was a great time, and I really appreciated that I couldn't guess it. But again, I'll say it wasn't anything that blew me out of the water. So I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5 stars. Okay, and the next book I'll talk about, and the last book I'll talk about in this spot, is Tokyo Ever After by Imako Jean. So this book is essentially a retelling of The Princess Diaries. So we follow a young woman who lives in America, and her mom has told her ever since she was young that she doesn't really know who her dad is. So she goes her entire life just, you know, not knowing who her father is, until one day she starts to kind of piece things together and she realizes that her dad is a Japanese prince. So she is able to get in contact with him, and then we follow her journey and her story as she goes and spends some time with her dad in Japan. I don't know about y'all, but I'm a 90s baby, and The Princess Diaries is my jam. And you know, I think it does a good job of using this familiar story to introduce us to a different culture, and just like opening us up to like different ways of life, especially if you're like American who, you know, and you've never like been to Japan, or you're just not familiar with the culture. I will say that I think this book focused too much on the romance, and not enough focus on like the relationship with her dad. And I don't think it focused enough on her and how she had to assimilate to, you know, a new culture, even though she is Japanese. You know, she was Japanese American, so she wasn't used to being in Japan. And so I would have just been a lot more interested in the story, I think, if I had gotten more of those aspects. But I will also caveat and say that this is a YA, like contemporary book, and I know I'm not the target audience for a YA book, and I don't really read YA that much anymore. You know, so take that feedback with a grain of salt if you're someone who does really enjoy YA. But I did give it a 3 out of 5 stars, so I still, you know, enjoyed my time good enough as I was listening to it on audio. And I will not be continuing on the series because it is a series, but if it's something that interests you, I say definitely go for it. All right, and on to our next location. All right, and so we have 2 books left for the month of July, and the first one is Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire, which is the first book in the Wayward Children series. So, you know, a lot of people on BookTube talk about this series, and I was just thinking, it's short, it's fantasy, and it seems to have a unique premise, so I was like, count me in, I'm gonna give it a go. And I would say that this book did not disappoint. I understand the hype that everybody puts around it. So in the setup of this series and in this first book, we are introduced to this school, or, you know, home for children who have gone through these like portals and doors that lead to other worlds. So think like Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, but it's like they are visiting various worlds and they're all a little different. So in the book, we kind of just like get a setup to how these worlds work, how the doors work. And on top of that, we are also introduced to this mystery that's going on. And so while this mystery is going on, not only are we learning about like the world and the school and like how the doors work, we are learning that some of these kids like want to go back through these portals, and why they can't, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And so I was just really into this book. Okay, I really enjoyed it. I did give it 4 out of 5 stars just because like I feel like there was something missing. I can't exactly put my finger on it because it's more of like a feeling. Like when I tried to think about, was it the writing style? Was it the characters? Was it the premise? It wasn't any of that. I think it was more so just like the feeling that I was getting. Like usually when I read a book in a series for the first time, I'm like, I gotta go all in head first. I want to read everything right now. And while I still definitely want to continue reading this series, there was just like that little, like, you know, there's just like something like a little spice that was just missing for me. And so the last book that I read in July was Counterfeit by Kirsten Chen. But Counterfeit follows 2 Asian women who start this counterfeit handbag business. And not only that, it kind of touches on family dynamics. It talks about motherhood. It talks about being the model minority, and like throughout this story we're learning about these women like finding themselves and finding their place in their families and their communities, and you know, just how that looks for them as they're trying to run this counterfeit handbag business. And I just thought this book was really interesting because I've heard that a lot of like really wealthy Asian women in Asian countries, even though they're really wealthy, they still want to buy counterfeit bags. And I know that you know, that's reality, but that piece of reality was kind of put into this book, which I really enjoyed. But I will say, the easiest way for me to describe kind of like what I didn't like about the book, or what like it didn't really like draw me in, I guess, is it's a Reese's book club pick, right? And I have nothing against Reese Witherspoon. I love her for the most part, but I think if you've read a lot of books that she picks for her book club, you kind of know the feeling of this book, right? Like her books always kind of revolve around some type of like family drama, family dynamics. There's usually some type of like underrepresented characters in the book. So, you know, that nothing wrong with any of those things, you know, but there was just nothing that was just really just like grabbing me and pulling me into the story. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It was a perfectly good and fine book. I just don't know if this would be the first book that would come out of my mouth to like recommend people. Like, it's probably a book that I'm not gonna think about very often. So if you're interested in reading it, I say pick it up. It just wasn't like my perfect cup of tea. And I'll still definitely be reading Reese's book club picks, because I feel like half the books that come out nowadays are on her book club. Her and Oprah got the game on lock. All right, and as you can see, the sun literally just set on me. So let's go to the next spot for August. All right, so up next, we're going to talk about the books that I read for the month of August. And first up is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. And so going into this book, I had really high hopes, because almost everybody has read this and loved it. And as I was picking it up, the movie was coming out. So I was like, yes, if I love this, then I can go watch the movie. However, I was about halfway done with the book when someone actually informed me that the author was actually under investigation for an actual murder. So there was that. But going into Where the Crawdads Sing, we are following a young orphaned girl who, you know, she's trying to learn how to fend for herself. She is trying to educate herself. We're also following her as she's trying to navigate societal norms, and as she's also trying to navigate some familial issues that are going on in her life. And in this book, there's also 2 timelines happening. So one where we're following this young girl, and another one where we're following this like murder investigation. And I'm going to be honest in saying that I was really bored with this book up until those 2 timelines merged together and they started to overlap. I was just really struggling with finding like the point of the book, to be honest. And I didn't really get the point until about 60% of the way into the book, and that's when it really started to pick up for me. However, once I got to the end, the book was just completely ruined for me. I really did not like the ending. To me, it felt like everything the author had done was negated by the ending. So I ended up giving this book 2 stars. I will probably never really think or talk about this book again. Up next, we have The House Across the Lake by Riley Sager. And going into this book, I was a little apprehensive because Riley Sager's last book, Survive the Night, was a bit of a disappointment for me. But The House Across the Lake follows this woman named Casey, and Casey is a former actress, and she's also a recent widow. So she decides to go to this lake house that her family owns as she's trying to pass some time and deal with her grief. And to pass some of that time, she decides that she's going to take some binoculars and, you know, start spying on her neighbors. And she takes particular interest in the couple that lives across the lake from her. And so the couple is named Catherine, and Catherine's husband, I don't remember Catherine's husband name. But one night as Casey is out there, you know, not minding her business, she sees Catherine drowning in the lake, and so she goes to save her. And from there, the 2 women just start this little friendship. With that friendship, Casey then becomes more intrigued with Catherine's life, and thus she begins spying on Catherine and her husband a lot more with those binoculars. And as she's spying, she starts to realize that something is a little off with Catherine and her husband. So when Catherine goes missing, Casey's like, oh, I'm really not about to mind my business. Let's see what's going on. And so this story is really wild, okay? It's a bit chaotic, it's a bit nonsensical, but I think that's why I liked it. And it really kept me on my toes. Even though Riley Sager tends to have like a formula to his books and you can kind of like figure out how characters are gonna play a role in the story, I personally guessed completely wrong on what characters were gonna play what part. I really thought I had this one figured out and it took me for a loop-de-loop, okay? But I absolutely loved it. I decided to give this book 4 out of 5 stars. I know that there's a lot of mixed reviews out there for this book and I can completely understand why, but for me, I liked it and I gave it 4 stars. And then we have In My Dreams I Hold a Knife by Ashley Winstead. So this book really had a moment on BookTube, okay? This was the it girl for a while. You know, a lot of popular booktubers are giving this book 4 and 5 stars. People are saying this is their favorite thriller ever. And so me going into this, I was like, ooh, this is gonna be a banger. And I mean, spoiler alert, it was not a banger for me. But let me go into the synopsis first and then I'll give you some of my thoughts on it. So this book is about 6 college friends and the unsolved murder of their friend from college. And so the story really kind of just starts out with them at their college reunion. And all 6 of them are back in the same place, back at the college. And while they're there, this unsolved murder obviously gets brought up. And, you know, new secrets are revealed, new motives are revealed, and you know, someone in their group is really trying to figure out, hey, I know one of you guys did this and we're gonna figure out who did it during this reunion. And so this book to me feels very like character and dialogue driven. It gives me real like rich, messy, gossipy vibes, which typically I would usually really love, but I think because this book didn't really have like a big shock factor, and because I didn't really feel that invested in the characters like from the jump, I was just like, I don't really care. I also just didn't really feel connected to the victim of the murder. So as I was reading it, I was just really hoping that there was going to be some type of like big revelation that happened, and you don't really get that in this book. And I would like to think that I don't necessarily need a big shock factor or a big you know, oh my god type of moment to enjoy a thriller, but I will be honest in saying that I do tend to gravitate and give a higher rating to books that have that kind of at the end. And so I think you'll still like this if you really like, I guess, just like the gossipy part and like the real story heavy part of a thriller. That's what this book gave me. And so while I still enjoyed my time, I still got through this book pretty fast. I'm giving this book a 3.25 out of 5 stars. So it was perfectly fine. It just really wasn't for me, I don't think, or it wasn't like something that I'm, you know, really just gonna rave about. So the last 3 books that I'm gonna talk about in this filming location and for the month of August are actually the self-help books that I read. So I did a vlog where I was trying to figure out if self-help books actually help, because I'm just pretty skeptical about them in general, and I had some pretty interesting results, so you should definitely go watch that. But the first book I read for that video was Tiny Changes, Remarkable Results, an easy and proven way to build good habits and break bad ones, also known as Atomic Habits. So the title of this book really is a great synopsis about what this book is about. It's literally how you implement small changes into your life to build big habits. And I think what I really enjoyed about this book is that the author gives you multiple methods on how to implement and change things in your life to help build different types of habits. He doesn't just focus on one method or one type of habit. It's not like a one-size-fits-all method. It's like, hey, try this. If this doesn't work, try this. And while a book like this runs the risk of getting really boring, I think the author did a good job of mixing in like those tangible things that you can do to build habits with like personal stories of his, as well as like examples of other people who have implemented some of these changes and how they've built habits. I also think that it was great that at the end of each chapter, he summarized all the important things that you should take away from the chapter. And I just think that this book was just really accessible and just really easy to digest. I'm giving it 5 out of 5 stars. Keep in mind though, this is like the first self-help book I've ever read. So maybe my rating will change the more self-help books I read. But as of now, I still think it's 5 out of 5 stars. And I think that if you're looking to build habits, whether they're big or small, this is a great place to start. So the next book I read is a book that I feel like every 20-something has read, and that's part of the reason I was very skeptical about reading it, and that was You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero. So one thing about self-help books that I was a little afraid of was that it was going to be a lot of like woo-woo, lofty, really big ideas that were like great in thought but not great in practice. This book, I was a little afraid of that happening with this, right? And I will say that I wasn't exactly wrong in thinking that. So You Are a Badass really kind of focuses on a mindset shift and a mindset change when you are trying to change your life. So it does talk a little bit about like manifesting, and no matter what type of change you're trying to make in your life, whether it's financial, whether you're trying to build a habit, whatever it is, you have to go into it with the right mindset. You have to go in believing that you can do it, that you are the type of person that lives that type of life. And so I understand what this book was doing, and I think depending on what type of self-help you're looking for, this book can definitely be something that motivates you, that just like gets you going on the right trajectory of like what you're trying to do. And for me, I think when I was reading this, I was kind of in a space where I think I kind of needed that little push and that little motivation, but it didn't really give too many tangible steps. But nonetheless, like I said, I think just depending on where you're at in your self-help journey, you can get something from this book. So I did give it a 3.75 stars. I don't know why I paused like that. And the last book I read for that vlog, and you can barely call it a book, is Strength Finders 2.0. This book, and I'm saying book because the whole reason you buy this really is to take the Strength Finders quiz online. And so if you've taken like a personality test of any sort, then it's kind of similar to that, except for instead of telling you about your personality, it just tells you about your strengths. And so the whole point of this is, a lot of people tend to focus on their weaknesses in life, and they're like, okay, I'm really bad at this, so I need to work on it and get better. Instead of being like, hey, I'm really good at these things, let me dive more into that. Let me find a job that really highlights those strengths. And so I think this book is great for anybody who has a job or anybody who is going to have a job in the future. So there are a total of 34 strengths that you can possibly get after taking the quiz. But they give you 5 at the end. And for me, I felt like all 5 of those were extremely accurate. A lot of those things I kind of already knew about myself, but it was really nice to kind of have them written and laid out the way that they were. So when you take the test, they do give you kind of like a printout of your 5 strengths, what they really mean, and then you kind of use the book as a companion, and it has all 34 strengths in here, but it gives you ways to apply your specific strengths, and it gives you some examples of people in real life who have those strengths and how they've utilized them. So this is a good companion, but it's like barely a book, because you really are only going to read like 5 sections in here. You're going to read whatever corresponds to your strengths. But I really think between the test and the companion, I think the value of this book is really great. So I ended up giving this 4 out of 5 stars, just thinking about the whole experience of Strength Finders. Just keep in mind that this isn't like a book. All right, so let's head over to the last filming location to talk about the last few books that I read for September. So for September, I was traveling a lot, okay? And so when I travel, I tend to not read that much. So I read 3 books in the month of September, and I was coming hot off my self-help book vlog. So I was still kind of in the mood to, improve myself. So I ended up picking up How to Lead When You're Not in Charge by Clay Scroggins. And so How to Lead When You're Not in Charge is another self-help book that really the title tells you what the book is about, right? So it teaches you about traditional leadership. It teaches you about how to deal with conflict resolution, especially with your boss. It teaches you how to handle certain situations, even when you're not in a position of power, but how to handle those situations so that you are more well equipped when you do get in a position of power to make sure that you're not abusing it. It also talks about toxic work environments and signs that you should be looking out for when you need to be leaving those environments. And overall, I really enjoyed this book. I will say that the author is a pastor, so there definitely is like a religious tone to this book, but I would say that it's not overly done, at least in my opinion. The book doesn't really feel like self-righteous or anything like that. It just more talks about how you can be a person of faith and still deal with some really tough environments with people. So I ended up giving it a 3.75 and I rounded up to a 4 on Goodreads. I think it's really great for people who are maybe not the beginning of their career, but definitely, you know, middle of their career, and you're just kind of, you're maybe looking for a promotion, or you might just having some trouble with your boss at work. I think this is a great book to pick up. All right, and then the last 2 books I read for September were actually a part of this vlog, where I was trying to determine if an author that I really loved one book from, if I would continue to love their works, and the author I featured was Blake Crouch. So the first book that I read in that vlog was Recursion. And so this book is really hard to talk about without spoiling it. And so if you really want to see some more of my, you know, intricate thoughts about it, make sure you go watch that vlog. But essentially in this book, we are following where the world is experiencing this like memory pandemic, where people are getting these false sets of memories, but they're not just normal memories. They are memories that feel very realistic, like people almost lived a second life. And so we follow 2 main characters, and we're following a couple of timelines as we kind of gather and learn about what this like memory issue actually is and how it's impacting everybody involved. And so this book had a lot of twists and turns. It was kind of like a mind fuck almost, because there was so much going on. I really liked the main idea of this book when it comes to like sci-fi themes, and I can't really tell you what that idea is without spoiling it. You really just kind of have to go into it. But I ended up giving this book a 3.75 only because I did feel like it did get a bit repetitive at the end, and I feel like the book was hard to track and follow at certain points, which definitely detracted from the experience for me. Overall, I still enjoyed it. It was just not the perfect book for me. And then last but not least, I read Upgrade by Blake Crouch. So Upgrade follows this world where DNA modification is like a real thing. And so our main character, he is part of this organization that is tasked to track down people who are illegally making DNA modifications. And so we find out that he is kind of tied to someone who made a really big oopsie slash boo-boo while dealing with DNA modifications. And we really get thrown into the story as on one of these raid missions trying to figure out someone who's doing something illegal. He gets hit with a little something, and things kind of just go from there. And this book is super fast paced. For me, DNA modification is just like something that I'm really I wouldn't say interested in, but intrigued by in real life. So this book was like already kind of started up here for me just because of the main like idea of the book. But I personally really enjoyed it because I felt like it was fast paced. I feel like we were getting new information all the time. And I think it did a good job of kind of holding up a mirror to our current society, where, you know, it kind of talks about like if we don't really take care of each other and if we don't take care of our planet, we are SOL. But I actually really enjoyed this book. After reading it, I did watch a few other people's reviews, and it hasn't been getting like the best reviews, and I can definitely understand why. From some of the other reviews I've heard, some of the themes were a little too on the nose, but for me, I really enjoyed that. And so in the vlog, I was grappling between giving this a 4.5 and a 5, and I'm really emotion based, so I was just like, I'm just gonna give it a 5. But I think upon further reflection, I'm going to give a 4.5. Nothing to do with those negative reviews that I heard about, just kind of just reflecting more on my actual experience with the book. I talk about a little bit why I would have given it a 4.5 in my vlog. So again, make sure you go watch that. But yeah, overall, I definitely enjoyed it, and I will definitely be picking up more Blake Crouch books in the future. All right, so that is my quarterly wrap up. Let me know down below in the comments if you've read any of these books, if you like the format of this video, or you were like, girl, you were doing way too much. And as always, if you made it to the end of this video, you are my absolute favorite, my little tater tot, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.